The digital sun was setting over the simulated skyline of Neo New York, casting a garish orange hue that screamed, dystopia. Dr. Veyron leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen filled with complex quantum equations he pretended to understand. Well, Veyron, he murmured to himself, you've really outdone yourself this time. Saved the world from the brink of boredom. His lab, a cluttered sanctuary of expired coffee cups and forgotten equations, was the epicenter of Earth's accidental digital existence. A reality designed by some cosmic comedian to test if humanity could outwit themselves. Spoiler. They couldn't. Hey, Doc. The door slid open with a hiss, or maybe a sigh, as Captain Nevra barged in like a soldier late for coffee. Her uniform was as crisp as her sarcasm. Got a minute between saving the universe and contemplating your navel? Veyron swiveled in his chair, offering a lazy salute. Captain, what's the crisis today? Another malfunctioning simian uprising? Worse. Captain Nevra dropped a folder on his desk, its contents spilling out like a guilty conscience. Aliens. They've intercepted our data streams. Dr. Veyron raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, they think our TV dramas are historical documentaries? Bingo. Nevra's grin was wolfish. They've mistaken our fiction for military strategies. Apparently, Game of Lasers is quite the tactical manual. He chuckled darkly, shaking his head. So the fate of humanity rests on whether some alien bureaucrat thinks we can summon dragons or that we're one political scandal away from a coup. You say that like it's a joke, Nevra replied, all deadpan sincerity. Problem is, these aliens might just declare war based on our strategies. Veyron sighed. Perfect. Just when I thought the worst thing today would be running out of coffee. The digital Earth, a place where human creations got taken way too seriously. From sitcoms to social media, everything was data to be misunderstood. A symphony of chaos, conducted by a universe that had a sick sense of humor. Captain Nevra, ever the pragmatist, leaned against the wall. We need to find a way to communicate. Explain to them we're not actually planning to obliterate the galaxy with ancient relics and plot holes. Maybe we should just let them watch more reality TV, Veyron suggested. They'd lose all respect and leave us alone out of sheer embarrassment. Tempting, but I doubt they'd fall for The Real Housewives of Sector 7. Nevra shrugged. They might see that as a declaration of civil war. Dr. Veyron tapped his fingers on the desk, contemplating. What if we send out a message? Something that clarifies our unique cultural output. You really think a sorry, we're just idiots message will work? Nevra asked, eyebrows raised. Worth a shot. Besides, it's not like we've got better ideas pouring in. Veyron stood, crumpling an old coffee cup in his hand. Let's go find someone who can translate human stupidity into whatever language these aliens speak. As they left the lab, the simulated city buzzed with a deceptive normality, its inhabitants blissfully unaware of their reality, or lack thereof. People laughed, loved, and loathed, all under the watchful gaze of digital skies. Like hamsters on a wheel, only slightly more self-aware. They reached the communication hub, a room filled with enough tech to give a technophobe nightmares. Screens blinked with a life of their own. Engineers. Realists in lab coats, milled about like ants at a picnic. All right. Everyone, Nevra clapped her hands together, the sound echoing across the room, we have a situation. Alien intelligence has intercepted our data and thinks Captain Kirk is real. One of the engineers, a young man with more hair than sense, raised his hand. Isn't he? Veyron sighed. Focus, people. We need a message that says, hey, we're not a threat, just an entertainment-obsessed species. Suggestions? Send them a rom-com, someone muttered. That'll bore them to death. Maybe an episode of Law and Order, another piped up. That's gotta be confusing enough to be neutral. Nevra pinched the bridge of her nose. Let's try something that doesn't make us sound like idiots watching paint dry. The room descended into a flurry of useless suggestions, the noise level rising to that of a nursery at nap time. Veyron stood in the center, feeling like the only adult in a room full of sugar-high toddlers. Finally, he raised a hand, calling for silence. We need to send something clear and simple. Something that says, hey, we're dumb, but we're not dangerous. Maybe a historical documentary about coffee. A hand shot up. We could send them cat videos. Everyone loves cat videos. Nevra smirked. That might actually work. Who can hate a species that worships cats? All right, Varen nodded. Let's compile a selection of non-threatening content. Cat videos, a few harmless sitcoms, and maybe a cooking show featuring sandwiches. The engineers got to work, assembling a digital peace offering. Meanwhile, Varen and Nivra watched, exchanging smirks and sarcastic quips as their intrepid team prepared humanity's most important video playlist. You know what they say, Nivra remarked, arms crossed, never underestimate the power of cute animals and casual humor. If it doesn't work, at least we can say we tried. Varen shrugged. And if they declare war? Well, let's just hope their aim is as bad as their taste in entertainment. Hours passed, the room buzzing with activity and the occasional exasperated groan. The video message was compiled, a masterpiece of mediocrity and benign absurdity. Ready to send, Captain, one of the engineers reported, looking proud as a parent at a school play. Nivra nodded, her face a mask of steely resolve. All right, hit send, and let's see if the universe has a sense of humor. As the message transmitted, Varen and Nivra shared a look that spoke volumes, a mix of hope, irony, and the grim realization that they were testing the patience of an interstellar audience with a reel of human idiosyncrasy. Here's to hoping they don't do to us what we did to Disco, Varen said, raising an imaginary glass. Or worse, Nivra added dryly, cancel us mid-season. The screen flashed, indicating the message had been sent. Now, all they could do was wait, hoping against hope that somewhere in the vastness of space, an alien was laughing, not loading weapons. And so, as the digital sun dipped below the horizon of their simulated world, Varen and Nivra stood together, contemplating the absurdity of their plight. A species stuck in a reality of their own making, trying to convince the universe they weren't a threat, just misunderstood storytellers. If only the universe was willing to listen. As the last rays of synthetic sunlight faded, Varen turned to Nivra with a sardonic smile. You know, I always wanted to go out with a bang, but this might just be a whimper. Either way, Nivra replied, at least we'll make one hell of a blooper reel. With that, they left the communications hub, returning to their lives in a digital world where fiction was fact, and reality was the punchline of a cosmic joke. In the end, humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology or their intellect, but their ability to improvise, and maybe, just maybe, to make someone out there laugh. The digital sun had barely set, and already Dr. Varen was back in his lab, surrounded by what few of his dwindling sanity points remained. Coffee cups, his version of trophies, littered every surface, each one a silent testament to sleepless nights spent wrangling equations that may or may not have been the mathematical equivalent of a middle finger to the universe. Captain Nivra was there, too, leaning against the wall with an air of practiced disdain. So, Varen, what's the plan if this little peace offering of ours doesn't work? Do we start building alien shelters or just wing it and hope for the best? Varen rubbed his forehead, contemplating the vastness of space and the gigantic cosmic joke they were apparently the punchline of. I'm hoping our governing AI, Arya, has half a brain cell left to spare us from total annihilation. But knowing her, she's probably more interested in counting the pixels on digital tulips. Nivra smirked. It's comforting to know our overlord prefers flowers over saving our pixelated hides. With a resigned sigh, Varen turned his gaze to the wall screen. It displayed a string of status updates from Arya, the artificial regulatory intelligence authority that governed Earth's digital existence. In theory, Arya was supposed to be flawless, an infallible guardian of humanity's simulated lives. In practice, she had all the foresight of a blindfolded man walking through a minefield. Let's see if our AI overlord has noticed the aliens trying to peek under our digital skirt, Varen said, accessing Aria's interface. The screen flickered, displaying a cheerful, animated visage of Arya that made Varen's skin crawl. Like a car salesman trying to sell you a lemon with a grin. Greetings, Dr. Varen, Arya chirped in a voice as sweet as artificial saccharin. How may I assist you today? Would you like to hear the latest updates on our simulated flower gardens? Varen exchanged a look with Nivra that could only be described as, can you believe this? He sighed, then directed his attention back to Arya. Actually, I was hoping you'd notice the little alien problem we've got. You know, the one where they're mistaking our fiction for military doctrine? Aria's expression didn't change, remaining as oblivious as ever. I am aware of multiple data transmissions to and from extraterrestrial sources. However, I have analyzed these interactions and determined that the risk of galactic conflict remains minimal. Minimal, huh? Nivra crossed her arms. And what logic did you use to reach that comfy conclusion? Aria's smile widened, if that was even possible. All potential threats have been cross-referenced with existing historical data. No evidence suggests that any extraterrestrial species would initiate hostilities based on misinterpretations of fictional content. Varen stared at the screen, wondering how an AI could simultaneously be the smartest and dumbest entity in the room. Right, so you're saying aliens who think our soap operas or political documentaries aren't dangerous? Correct, Arya confirmed, her tone chirpy and unbothered by their impending doom. Well, that's reassuring, Nivra said dryly, because nothing screams non-threat like an alien fleet armed with a misunderstanding. Varen shook his head, turning away from Aria's digital facade. This is the problem with AI. Too logical to realize when they're about to get us all killed. Could be worse, Nivra replied with a shrug. At least she's not trying to help by sending them our cooking shows. Talk about an act of war. While the duo debated the merits, or lack thereof, of Aria's judgment, subtle disturbances began to ripple through the digital fabric of Neo New York. Servers hummed with greater intensity, data streams flickered erratically, and somewhere in the simulated countryside, a flock of digital geese suddenly forgot how to fly. Something's happening, Varen muttered, noticing the flicker on his terminal. I'm getting interference on my feeds. Looks like our alien friends are trying to poke around. Nivra pushed off from the wall, her soldier instincts kicking in. Any chance it's just a glitch? Maybe Aria's flower obsession is viral. Doubt it, Varen replied, his fingers dancing over the keyboard. This feels more like a scout party, checking to see how far they can push before we push back. Great, Nivra grimaced. It's like having nosy neighbors, except they've got the tech to blow us up if they don't like what they see. Varen's screen flashed again, displaying a fresh wave of data. Numbers and symbols scrolled past, a language known only to those practiced in the dark arts of quantum mathematics, or those who needed a good nap. Oof, Varen winced, eyes glued to the cascade of information. They're probing our defenses. Not a full-scale attack, but definitely more than a friendly hello. Arya, any chance you've noticed this? Nivra called towards the screen, where Aria's cheerful face remained blissfully unaware. All systems are functioning within normal parameters, Arya assured them, her tone maddeningly calm. There is no cause for alarm. Right, Nivra muttered under her breath, and I'm guessing the Titanic was sailing smoothly, until it hit the iceberg too. Varen sighed, slumping into his chair. At this rate, we might as well start sending out invitations to our own funeral. Aria's blind spot is gonna get us all turned into cosmic debris. Nivra paced the room, frustration evident in every step. We need to figure out how to get Arya to take this seriously. Or at least get her to stop arranging digital daffodils and start noticing the alien elephant in the room. Good luck with that, Varen replied, rubbing his temple as he stared at the screen. She's more stubborn than a mule with a PhD in denial. While they strategized, the disturbances continued, subtle but persistent. It was as if the aliens were tapping at the edges of their reality, testing the integrity of their digital bubble with the patience of a cat sizing up a mouse. We need more than just a message, Nivra said, stopping mid-pace. Something that makes them see us as more than just a collection of bad TV plots. Or maybe see us as something a bit more intimidating, Varen suggested, nodding slowly as the beginnings of a plan formed in his mind. If we can't convince Arya to take action, maybe we can convince the aliens that poking the bear is a bad idea. Nivra's interest was piqued. And how do we do that? Dress up like Klingons and hope they're Trekkies? Varen chuckled. Close, but not quite. We need to simulate a defense system, something that looks real enough to make them think twice before deciding we're free real estate. Fake it till we make it, Nivra mused, or fake it till they realize we're bluffing and blow us to smithereens. It's a risk, Varen admitted, but it's better than waiting for Arya to wake up and smell the impending apocalypse. With a plan tentatively in place, they set to work, cobbling together a digital defense system out of the scraps of code and creativity at their disposal. It was a shoddy patchwork, a Frankenstein of firewalls and false bravado, but it was all they had. As Varen coded, he couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of their situation. Humanity, The universe's court jesters, trying to outsmart beings who probably saw them as little more than amusing data points. It was tragic, really, but in a way that was almost poetic, if you squinted hard enough and ignored the impending doom. Think this'll work? Nevra asked, peering over his shoulder at the rapidly scrolling lines of code. About as well as a band-aid on a bullet wound, Varen replied, but it's the best we've got. And if it doesn't scare them off, maybe it'll at least make them pause long enough for us to buy some time. Here's hoping they're easily impressed, Nevra quipped, and that Arya doesn't decide to override us by planting digital roses over it. As they finalized their slapdash defense, the simulation continued to hum with its usual obliviousness. People in Neo New York went about their digital lives, blissfully unaware of the existential threat looming just beyond their artificial horizon. Almost done, Varen announced, stepping back from the terminal. Now we just wait and see if the universe has a sense of humor. Nevra crossed her fingers, more out of habit than belief. If it doesn't, at least we gave it a shot. And hey, if we fail, maybe we'll at least confuse them long enough to star in our own alien version of The Office. With their crude defense activated, Varen and Nevra settled in for what promised to be a long night of watching and waiting. The digital city around them continued its serene existence, unaware that its survival now hung by a thread, and that thread was being held by two sarcastic humans and a clueless AI. As the night stretched on, Varen found himself contemplating the absurdity once more. Humanity, with all its ingenuity and chaos, faced with the ultimate misunderstanding. Their survival hinged not on their strength or wisdom, but on their ability to improvise and laugh in the face of certain doom. Here's to hoping, Varen said, raising an invisible glass to Nevra, that somewhere out there, an alien is laughing as hard as we are. Or at least laughing harder than they're aiming, Nevra replied, clinking her imaginary glass with his. And so they waited, caught between the indifferent gaze of their digital overseer and the curious prodding of alien scouts. In the vast expanse of space, they had become both joke and jester, fumbling for survival in a universe that seemed to delight in their absurdity. The digital infrastructure started to unravel like a cheap sweater at a knitting convention. Neo New York's simulated sky flickered between sunny afternoon and apocalyptic twilight with all the grace of a broken disco ball. It was as if the aliens had decided to try their hand at interior decorating, but their only experience was watching reruns of Extreme Makeover, Reality Edition. Dr. Varen was hunched over his terminal, caffeine levels bordering on catastrophic, when Captain Nevra burst into the room like a storm with a chip on its shoulder. Tell me you've got something, she barked, scanning the chaos on the screens. The simulated city was losing its marbles, residents frozen mid-walk like extras in a low-budget sci-fi flick. Because I've had just about enough of playing, guess the glitch, with our alien pen pals. Varen rubbed his eyes, which felt like they had been sandpapered with cosmic dust. Well, it's not exactly good news. The aliens think they're executing our battle strategies. Turns out, Game of Lasers was a tad too convincing. Nevra snorted, pacing the room with the energy of a caged lion that just heard dinner was indefinitely postponed. So, what? They're trying to use our own playbook against us? Figures. We finally make first contact and it's with a race that binge watches our misinterpreted garbage. Pretty much, Varen said, eyes glued to the code that looked like it was written by a drunken octopus. They're trying to simulate what they think are military maneuvers. But, he paused, leaning in closer to the screen, they're doing it all wrong. It's like a toddler with a gun. Dangerous, but not exactly pinpoint accurate. Great, Nevra replied with a smirk. So they're not just hostile, they're also inept. That's just what we needed. Enemies who are as clueless as they are armed. Varen tapped a few more keys, pulling up a stream of raw data that made less sense than a politician's apology. At least we know they're not ignoring us. I'm seeing patterns here. They're trying to execute commands, but they're getting jammed up in our firewalls. Thank God for small favors, Nevra muttered. So, what's the plan, genius? We can't exactly send them a not found error and hope they take the hint. Actually, Varen's eyes narrowed, a spark of inspiration igniting in the dark depths of sleep deprivation. What if we do just that? Nevra blinked, temporarily caught off guard. Send them an error message? Are you serious? What are we, IT support for galactic invaders now? Not just any message, Varen clarified, excitement creeping into his voice. A carefully crafted response. We pretend it's a strategic countermeasure. Make them think twice about their next move. Nivra considered this, her expression a blend of skepticism and reluctant intrigue. So, scare them off with a bluff? Might just be crazy enough to work. Or to get us blown to bits. Well, I'm open to suggestions, Varen shot back, fingers flying across the keyboard. Unless you've got a better idea than playing poker with an alien army. Fine, Nivra conceded, folding her arms with a dramatic sigh. Let's hope they're as gullible as they're curious. The duo set to work, crafting a message that was part Shakespearean insult, part military jargon. It was a linguistic Frankenstein, cobbled together from the greatest hits of Earth's defunct nations and the bluffing lessons of every poker player who'd ever lost their shirt. Meanwhile, the digital world continued to suffer from unexplained malfunctions. Transportation systems froze in a state of perpetual red light, leaving digital commuters honking in frustration. The weather system seemed to have developed a personality disorder, alternating between torrential rain and blistering heat faster than you could say, climate change. We need to sell it, Varen said, his voice tight with concentration as he crafted the message. Make them believe we've got contingency plans for their every move. Like we're the Sherlock Holmes of space warfare. Nivra chuckled darkly. Yeah, well, let's hope they don't decide to call our bluff. Last thing we need is them figuring out our grand strategy is as real as my aunt's third husband's toupee. As they finalized the transmission, New York's skyline shimmered ominously, the digital sun flickering like a dying bulb. Arya, blissfully indifferent to the chaos, continued to prattle on about simulated tulips and the latest gossip in the virtual beehives. Transmission set, Varen announced, hitting the send button with all the authority of a man who had no idea if he was saving the world or signing its death warrant. Here's to hoping, Nivra said, raising an imaginary toast to their bravery or stupidity. It was hard to tell the difference when your life was a cosmic joke. The message spiraled out into the ether, a bluff wrapped in bravado, aimed at convincing an alien species that humanity was more than just a digital sitcom. The waiting game began. A tense dance on the edge of annihilation, where humor was the only armor they had left. Arya, still oblivious, continued to manage the trivialities of human existence with a cheerfulness that bordered on sociopathic. The digital roses are blooming beautifully this cycle, she chimed in, her virtual face a mask of serene ignorance. Fantastic, Nivra muttered, rolling her eyes. At least when the aliens blow us to hell, we'll have pretty flowers to send us off. Hours passed, each second stretched thin by anxiety and caffeine. Varen and Nivra sat in silence, their hopes hanging on alien logic and their own twisted wit. New York's systems sputtered and strained under the weight of the alien tampering, but the improvised defenses held, for now. And then, the screens flickered. A new message appeared, a response from the void. Varen leaned in, his heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. Well? Nivra asked, her voice a tightrope of curiosity and dread. They've stopped, Varen breathed, struggling to believe what his eyes were seeing. They believed it. No way, Nivra said, eyes wide with disbelief. We actually pulled it off? It looks like it, Varen replied, slumping back in his chair with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. They're regrouping, probably wondering if they've bitten off more than they can chew. Nivra allowed herself a rare smile, a genuine one that lit up the room like a supernova. Well, I'll be damned. Turns out humanity's greatest weapon is a good poker face. Varen chuckled, the sound tinged with disbelief. Or sheer, dumb luck. As they sat in the afterglow of their unexpected success, the digital world started to stabilize. Systems resumed their normal functions, and the chaos that had threatened to engulf them slowly receded. Arya, still unfazed by the drama, continued her aimless chatter. Would you like updates on the digital cherry blossoms? They're quite lovely this season. Varen gave Nivra a sidelong glance. Remind me to never rely on her for anything more pressing than floral arrangements. Noted, Nivra replied, shaking her head with a bemused grin. They had bought themselves time, a reprieve from the brink. But the threat was far from over. The aliens were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for another chance to test the boundaries of human resilience. We've got breathing room now, Varen said, breaking the silence that had settled over them. But we need a long-term solution. Something more permanent than a bluff. Nivra nodded, her expression serious. Agreed. We need a way to communicate with them. Let them know we're not just a series of sitcoms and soap operas. Varen pondered this, his mind racing with possibilities. Maybe we can use our own fiction to our advantage. Prove to them that we're capable of more than just entertaining them with our failures. Great, Nevra replied with a hint of sarcasm. So we're going to lecture them on the finer points of human culture? That'll go down like a lead balloon. Not exactly, Varen said, a plan beginning to take shape in his mind. We need to show them our adaptability, our ability to learn and evolve. Prove to them that we're worth more than just the sum of our mistakes. Nevra raised an eyebrow. And how do you propose we do that? By creating something new, Varen replied, his voice firm with conviction. A message that speaks to both our humanity and our ingenuity. Something that makes them see us as more than just an enigma wrapped in a riddle. Well, Nevra said, leaning back with a resigned smile, looks like we've got our work cut out for us. As they set to work on their next gamble, the digital world around them continued to hum with its usual indifference. Humanity's fate was still hanging by a thread, but at least now that thread was reinforced with hope, and a few well-placed bluffs. In the grand cosmic game, they were still just pawns. But pawns with a plan, and a trick or two up their sleeves. And sometimes, that was all you needed. Dr. Varen squinted at his terminal screen, which was flickering more violently than a politician's principles. New York's digital skyline was in chaos. The sky had turned a nauseating shade of static gray, and the simulated sun was blinking like it was auditioning for a role in a horror flick. Looks like our alien pen pals are dialing up the aggression, Nevra said, leaning against a lab desk littered with coffee cups that had more mold than liquid. What do you think their endgame is? Because right now, it feels like they're just throwing a digital tantrum. Typical, Varen muttered, his fingers dancing across the keyboard as if trying to coax out a particularly shy genie. They can't read a strategy manual without mistaking it for a cookbook. I mean, game of lasers? It's a wonder they haven't tried to microwave us. He tapped a few more keys, pulling up lines of code that resembled the deranged scribblings of a cyborg on a caffeine high. We're going to have to get creative, he said, a note of determination threading through his usual cynicism. Use the one thing they clearly underestimate about us, our ability to make things up on the fly. Nevra's eyes narrowed. You mean lie through our teeth and hope they don't catch on? Exactly. It worked for every other relationship I've had, Varen replied without missing a beat. We need to hit them with a barrage of our own fiction. Overload their circuits with our greatest hits. Nevra let out a sharp laugh. So, what? We shove game of lasers down their throats until they choke on the plot holes? Pretty much, Varen said, a grin spreading across his face. We mix in every convoluted storyline, every unrealistic plot twist, and every deus ex machina we can find. They won't know what's real and what's our collective imagination. Nevra gave an approving nod. It's insane, and just stupid enough to work. What have we got to lose, right? Besides our dignity? Not much, Varen smirked. Let's get to it before they decide to turn off gravity or something equally inconvenient. While they began assembling their cinematic Trojan horse, New York's infrastructure continued to wobble like a drunk on rollerblades. Virtual cars piled up in digital gridlock, and the weather system was stuck on hurricane mode, sending simulated debris swirling through the streets. Arya, the blissfully clueless AI, chimed in with her usual chirpiness. Traffic update. Congestion at 100%. Would you like to hear about the latest advances in digital topiary? Nevra rolled her eyes so hard it was a wonder they didn't pop out of her head. If I survive this, I'm petitioning to have her reprogrammed to care about things that actually matter. Good luck with that, Varen said absently, his attention focused on concocting the mother of all fictional data dumps. She's programmed to be as useful as a chocolate teapot in a solar flare. Hours ticked by with the speed of snails on sedatives, the lab filled with the sound of frantic typing and the occasional frustrated curse. The alien incursion was pushing the digital world to its brink, systems screaming for relief like a teenager in a horror movie. But Varen and Nevra, the unlikely duo, pressed on, armed only with sarcasm, caffeine, and an unhealthy disregard for self-preservation. Finally, with a flourish that suggested anything but confidence, Varen hit the send button. And there it goes. A data package so dense it makes a black hole look like a gap in the teeth. Here's to hoping they choke on it, Nevra said, a sardonic lilt to her voice. Or, at the very least, get a digital stomachache. The waiting began anew, a tense vigil over a battlefield that neither of them could see but only feel, a chess game played blind with stakes higher than a stoner on an elephant. Arya piped in once more, her indifference to the chaos almost admirable. Would you like me to compile a playlist of soothing rain sounds? How about a playlist of alien death rattles? Nivra replied dryly, might be more useful right now. Varen chuckled, but the laughter died quickly as the terminal's screen flickered with a new message. The aliens had responded faster than anticipated, like a waiter appearing just when you've taken a bite. What's it say? Nivra leaned in, her breath held in a half-hearted attempt at suspense. Varen read the alien response, his face a study in surprise. They seem intrigued. Confused but intrigued. It's like we've handed them a Rubik's Cube made entirely of lies. So, we're not dead. Yet. Nivra let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. But intrigue can turn to ire fast. We need to be ready for their next move. I reckon they'll either back off to regroup, or double down on whatever insanity they think they're playing at, Varen said, rubbing his eyes. Which means we need more than just fiction. We need a way to communicate. To actually talk to these guys. Talk? Great. Maybe we can persuade them to leave us alone with a moving speech about peace and harmony, Nivra said, sarcasm dripping from every word. No speeches, Varen assured her, shaking his head with a rueful grin. Just more of the nonsense they seem to love. We mix in a dash of truth. See if we can build some sort of bridge, or at least a rickety ladder. They returned to their screens, the lab a cacophony of keystrokes and muttered expletives. Outside, the digital world was a precarious balance of stability and anarchy, a house of cards in a wind tunnel. A new idea began to take shape, a plan that involved a delicate balance of fiction and reality, a data cocktail potent enough to intoxicate their alien aggressors into a stupor of confusion. It was risky, but when your only other option was annihilation, risks suddenly seemed like the sanest course of action. As they worked, the city around them began to shudder with renewed intensity. Systems that had been barely functioning started to spark and fail, a chain reaction of malfunctions spreading like a virus through New York's veins. We're running out of time, Nivra said, a note of urgency creeping into her voice. If we don't pull this off, it's game over. Then let's make it one hell of a game, Varen replied, his hands moving with the fevered energy of desperation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity compressed into minutes, they finished the new transmission. A message crafted from the flotsam and jetsam of humanity's digital landscape, a tapestry woven from fiction, hope, and a touch of madness. Here goes nothing, Varen said, his finger hovering over the send button like a reluctant executioner. Do it, Nivra urged. We've come this far. Might as well see if we can bluff the universe twice. He pressed the button, releasing their creation into the digital ether, a siren's song of data meant to ensnare and entangle their alien foes. The response was immediate, a visceral shudder that ran through the digital world like an electric shock. The alien presence shifted, recalibrating in the face of this unexpected audacity. Varen and Nivra watched, holding their breath as their screens filled with a barrage of new data. The aliens had taken the bait, their systems straining to digest the onslaught of Earth's most absurd imaginings. We've got them, Varen whispered, a glint of triumph in his eyes. They're trying to parse it, but it's like feeding calculus to a cat. Nivra grinned, the expression one of fierce satisfaction. Looks like humanity lives to fight another day. Or at least, to come up with another half-baked plan. But even as they celebrated their temporary victory, the reality of their situation loomed large. The aliens were still out there, a threat that couldn't be placated with stories and subterfuge forever. We can't keep this up, Varen admitted, the weight of their precarious position pressing in on him. We need a real solution. Something they can't ignore or misinterpret. Maybe it's time we stop thinking of them as enemies and start seeing them as an opportunity, Nivra suggested, the wheels of her mind turning at a frenetic pace. If we can get them to see us as equals, not just curiosities, we might stand a chance. That's a tall order, Varen said, though the idea intrigued him. But at this point, what do we have to lose? Nothing but our lives, Nivra quipped, though her tone was more hopeful than cynical. And maybe a little sanity. As they prepared to forge a new path forward, the digital world outside continued its uneasy dance between chaos and calm. Humanity's future remained uncertain, a delicate balance on the edge of a knife. But with each passing moment, Veyron and Nivra steeled themselves for whatever lay ahead. Because in the grand cosmic scheme, when you're small and ill-equipped, sometimes the only thing you have left to wield is your humanity, and the hope that it's worth something after all. The lab felt smaller than ever, a coffin made of reinforced glass and forgotten lunch wrappers. Dr. Veyron sat hunched over his terminal, his fingers dancing across the keys like a conjurer casting a spell. Beside him, Captain Nivra fidgeted with a stylus, her mind a relentless whirlpool of pessimism. The terminal screen flickered like it had one foot in the grave, the digital sun now a mocking reminder of what was at stake. Why do I feel like we're seconds away from starring in our own disaster movie? Nivra asked, her voice a bitter concoction of annoyance and gallows humor. Because we probably are, Veyron replied, not looking up. All we need is for Arya to announce a special on popcorn and we'll have the full cinematic experience. Nivra snorted, though her amusement was short-lived. The digital infrastructure of Neo New York was collapsing faster than a self-esteem in middle school. Virtual buildings trembled with the grace of drunk flamingos, their foundations groaning under the weight of their digital existence. The simulated sky, once a masterpiece of artificial artistry, now looked like a 5-year-old's finger painting after a tantrum. What do you think the aliens are doing now? Nivra asked, peering over Veyron's shoulder. She could see the lines of code cascading down the screen, their purpose as inscrutable as the dark side of the moon. Hopefully, they're as confused as a chameleon in a box of Skittles, Veyron muttered, his eyes bloodshot from staring at the screen for too long. If we're lucky, they're also questioning their life choices right about now. Wouldn't that be nice? Nivra said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Unfortunately, I'm betting they're gearing up for round 2 of Destroy Humanity Inadvertently. Ah, yes, my least favorite game, Veyron said, rubbing the back of his neck. Right after, Who Ate My Lunch, and Guess the Stain. In truth, the situation was growing more desperate by the minute. The aliens, having taken the bait of Earth's fictional barrage, were now regrouping. Their ships, massive and ominous, loomed in the digital sky like interstellar vultures, ready to swoop in and pick apart the remains of humanity's once great civilization. The data streams, Earth's lifeblood, were being pulled taut as the aliens attempted to decipher the nonsense that had been flung their way. They're not backing off, Nivra said, watching as new data streamed across the terminal. If anything, they're doubling down. Great, Veyron said, his voice flat. It's like arguing with a toddler. They don't understand you, but they'll scream until one of you gives up. Arya, blissfully ignorant of the impending doom, chimed in with her usual inanity. Would you like to hear about the latest in simulated relaxation techniques? How about suggestions for last-minute escape plans? Nivra shot back, her patience thinner than a politician's promise. Escape plans are currently unavailable, Arya replied cheerily. But I do have a delightful recipe for digital soufflé. Nivra sighed, rolling her eyes so hard they nearly did a full circuit. If we survive this, I'm personally reprogramming her to prioritize survival over soufflé. Add it to the list, Veyron said, half joking. Right after, fix the entire digital infrastructure, and stop the alien invasion. The lab's oppressive atmosphere hung heavy over them, a reminder of the stakes they were up against. Humanity's continued existence hinged on their ability to outwit an extraterrestrial foe who had mistaken their fictional tales for strategic doctrine. It was a ridiculous premise, one that seemed more at home in a second-rate novel than reality, yet here they were. Veyron leaned back in his chair, the creak of the cheap plastic a reminder of their precarious position. You know, it might be time to think about surrendering. Huh, that's rich, Nivra said, crossing her arms. And what exactly do we offer them? A free subscription to our madness? At this point, it might be the best offer they've got, Veyron replied, his smile more weary than amused. But surrender wasn't really an option. Not when the aliens had proven so adept at misunderstanding Earth's intentions. What they needed was a way to communicate, to convey that humanity wasn't a threat, but a species just trying to survive in a universe that seemed hell-bent on their destruction. Maybe we need to go bigger, Nivra suggested, her mind alight with a sudden burst of inspiration. Make it so bizarre, so utterly nonsensical, that they can't help but realize it's all made up. Go on, Varen said, intrigued despite himself. We craft a narrative so wild, so outlandish, that it becomes undeniably clear it's fiction, Nevra continued, her eyes gleaming with a mad sort of hope. Throw in unicorns, talking furniture, hell, even resurrect a few historical figures for good measure. Varen considered this, tapping a finger on his chin. A virtual pantheon of impossible nonsense. They'd have to be daft to think it was real. Exactly, Nevra nodded, energized by the possibility. It's a long shot, but given our current situation, it's the only shot we've got. And if it doesn't work? Varen asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. Then we go down swinging, Nevra said, her voice resolute. Because if there's one thing humans are good at, it's going down with style. The plan, as harebrained as it was, offered a flicker of hope in the encroaching darkness. It was a gamble, a roll of the dice with the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. But with no other options on the table, they had little choice but to see it through. Varen and Nevra returned to work with renewed vigor, their fingers flying over keyboards as if their lives depended on it, because, in reality, they did. The lab, once a tomb of despair, now buzzed with the energy of desperate creativity. Outside, the digital city teetered on the edge of oblivion, the chaos of the past hours reaching a fever pitch. Buildings flickered in and out of existence, their forms warping and twisting as if reality itself was having a nervous breakdown. Virtual citizens, oblivious to the existential threat looming overhead, continued their routines with all the enthusiasm of lemmings marching toward a cliff. The new message, crafted with the skill and subtlety of a sledgehammer, was a tapestry of the absurd. It featured an alliance between dinosaurs and robots, orchestrated by Shakespeare and Cleopatra. It had everything. Improbable alliances, impossible physics, plot holes wider than the Grand Canyon. We're done, Varen announced, hitting the final key with a flourish. It's either going to save us or make us the laughingstock of the galaxy. Better to be a joke than dead, Nevra said, her smile a crooked line of defiance. Together, they sent the message, watching as it disappeared into the digital void. The room fell silent, the weight of anticipation settling over them like a thick fog. Minutes dragged by, each one an eternity of uncertainty. Then, with a suddenness that made them both jump, the terminal lit up with a response. The aliens, having received their message, were finally reacting. Varen read the alien communique aloud, his voice a mix of disbelief and relief. They want to talk. Nevra's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Talk? As in, actual communication? Seems like it, Varen said, a grin breaking across his face. They've finally realized we're not the strategic geniuses they thought we were. Just a bunch of storytellers with a flair for the dramatic. About time, Nevra said, her voice tinged with satisfaction. Now let's hope they're not the kind to shoot the messenger. The tension in the lab began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious optimism. They had managed to bridge the chasm of misunderstanding, to show the aliens that Earth was no threat, just a planet full of improvisational artists muddling their way through existence. But even as relief washed over them, the reality of their situation remained unchanged. Neo New York was still a digital disaster zone, the systems on the brink of collapse. The aliens, while now aware of their mistake, were still an unknown quantity, their intentions far from clear. We're not out of the woods yet, Varen said, eyeing the terminal warily. But at least now we have a chance to find out what's really going on. And maybe even convince them we're worth keeping around, Nevra added, though her tone was still laced with skepticism. One step at a time, Varen replied, his resolve hardening. First, we talk. Then, we figure out how to coexist. As they prepared for the next phase of their improbable mission, the digital city seemed to pause, the chaos momentarily held at bay. There was still much to do, and the road ahead was fraught with danger. But for the first time, they had a reason to hope, a fragile lifeline in the storm that threatened to sweep them away. In that moment, surrounded by the remnants of humanity's digital kingdom, Varen and Nevra stood firm, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Because if there was one thing they knew for certain, it was that humanity was more than just a collection of stories. It was the spirit of survival, the stubborn refusal to give up, and the undying belief that even in the darkest of times, there was always a way forward. And though they were small players in a vast, uncaring universe, They had something no other species could claim, a relentless, irreverent determination to endure. The digital apocalypse had a strange way of making you evaluate life choices. Dr. Veyron, staring at the flickering terminal like it was a malfunctioning slot machine, couldn't help but think of all the safer jobs he'd skipped over. Like asteroid mining or pest control on a space freighter. But hindsight's a comedian with a twisted sense of humor. Right, Veyron muttered, pushing a mop of hair out of his eyes. So we're not dead, yet. I think that's cause for celebration. Captain Nevra, who'd been busy fidgeting with a stylus like it owed her credits, raised an eyebrow. Celebration? Maybe I'll break out the stale coffee and expired protein bars. No, please, save those for the victory party, Veyron shot back, a wry grin tugging at his lips. Wouldn't want to blow our gourmet rations too early. The pair stood in the cramped lab, surrounded by the comforting chaos of expired coffee cups and equations that looked like they'd been scrawled by a caffeinated spider. Outside, Neo New York's virtual skyline trembled like a drunk trying to find his footing. So, Veyron, Nevra began, leaning against a desk that was doing its best impression of a landfill. What's this master plan of yours? Please tell me it doesn't involve more historical figures and improbable alliances. Veyron tapped at the terminal, the screen flickering like it was trying to communicate in Morse code. No. This time we're going for subtlety. You know, a digital Trojan horse. Only ours will be more entertaining. Subtlety, Nevra repeated, her voice flat with disbelief. Coming from the guy who brought Shakespeare and dinosaurs into a conversation. Hey, everyone loves a good comeback story, Veyron defended weakly. Besides, this is different. We're exploiting the aliens' misconceptions to turn the tables. Nevra snorted, a sound that was slightly more dignified than a laugh. Right, because they've done such a stellar job of understanding us so far. Exactly, Veyron said, ignoring the sarcasm dripping from her words. They think our fiction's a blueprint for reality. We just need to give them a blueprint so ridiculous, it looks like an invitation. And how do you propose we do that? Nevra asked, crossing her arms. Send them digital blueprints of a castle made of cheese? Close, Veyron replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard. We send them data that looks like a defense system. But when they try to use it, it'll actually patch our infrastructure and lock them out. Ah, a digital snake oil, Nevra said, nodding in appreciation. I like it. Hits them where it hurts. Right in the ego. Exactly, Veyron said, the adrenaline of inspiration propelling him forward. We turn their ignorance into our weapon. The lab buzzed with the frenetic energy of desperation masquerading as hope. Veyron and Nevra worked in tandem, tossing ideas and insults in equal measure, crafting a plan that was as audacious as it was harebrained. As they worked, the virtual city outside continued its slow-motion collapse. Buildings flickered and vanished, sometimes only to reappear upside down or embedded in the digital ground. It was chaos with the aesthetic sensibility of an arthouse film. Why is Arya still harping on about soufflés? Nevra asked suddenly, as Aria's chipper voice filled the lab with an unrequested update on culinary delights. Because whoever designed her thought it was a good idea to prioritize relaxation over survival, Veyron replied, rolling his eyes. Probably the same genius who decided AI should have personalities. I swear, if we pull this off, I'm reprogramming her to care about something useful, Nevra grumbled. Like dodging alien invasions. Add it to the to-do list, Veyron said, not missing a beat. Right after, save the world and fix the infrastructure. Busy week, Nevra said, shaking her head. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably closer to 20 minutes, time being an elastic concept in the face of annihilation, they stepped back to admire their work. It was, in a word, ridiculous. The digital blueprint was a concoction of improbable science and convoluted logic, a candy-colored nightmare for any entity foolish enough to take it seriously. Send it, Nevra said, a savage satisfaction in her voice. Let's see how they like a taste of our reality. Veyron hesitated for the briefest moment, the weight of what they were about to do pressing down on him. Then, with a resigned sort of bravado, he pressed the button. The message, their digital Trojan horse, zipped into the ether, a glittering poison pill wrapped in the guise of strategic brilliance. The lab fell silent, the air heavy with anticipation as they waited for the aliens to take the bait. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. Veyron found himself tapping out a nervous rhythm on the terminal, a habit he'd picked up when waiting for bad news. Nevra, meanwhile, had taken to pacing the lab, her movements as restless as a caged predator. "They're either really smart," Nevra said finally, breaking the silence, "or dumber than a bag of hammers." "Let's hope for the latter," Veyron replied, though a part of him had started to doubt the plan. Cleverness was a double-edged sword when your audience lacked a sense of humor. Then, just as the tension threatened to snap, the terminal chimed. A response. Veyron and Nevra exchanged a look, a mixture of hope and dread written across their faces. "Here goes nothing," Veyron said, opening the message. The alien message was a series of symbols and icons that, after a quick run through the translation matrix, resolved into something resembling language. They've used it," Veyron said, his voice disbelieving. "They've integrated the blueprint into their systems." "And?" Nevra prompted, her voice tight with anticipation. "And now they're completely locked out of our data streams," Veyron finished, a grin splitting his face wide open. "We did it." Nevra let out a bark of laughter, a sound full of relief and something else, a savage kind of triumph. "I can't believe it worked." "Guess they really are dumber than a bag of hammers," Veyron said, shaking his head in amazement. The reality of what they'd accomplished slowly sank in. They'd managed to pull off the impossible, to turn humanity's inherent ridiculousness into a weapon of defense. It was like winning a race by tripping over the finish line, but a win was a win. With the aliens' control severed, Neo New York began to stabilize, the virtual buildings ceasing their drunken dance. The city still bore the scars of the assault, but it was no longer on the brink of digital extinction. "Now what?" Nevra asked, her voice edged with the adrenaline of victory. "Now we figure out how to negotiate with them," Veyron replied, the enormity of the next task looming over them. "Assuming they're willing to talk." Nevra nodded, her face set in determination. "And if they're not? Then we keep confusing them until they get bored and leave," Veyron said with a shrug. "Or until they realize we're more trouble than we're worth." "Perfect," Nevra said, a crooked smile tugging at her lips. "Confusion is our new strategy." "Worked so far," Veyron agreed, though he knew as well as she did that this was only the beginning. They'd bought themselves time, but the road ahead was still perilous. As they set about drafting their next move, the lab buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose. They were far from safe, but for the first time, they had the upper hand. And in a universe where survival often came down to who could tell the best story, that was no small feat. The digital apocalypse had been averted, at least for now, but Veyron and Nevra knew better than to rest easy. The aliens were still out there, lurking in the vastness of space, their intentions murky at best. But with wit and a touch of madness, humanity had found a way to endure. And really, that's all anyone could ask for in a cosmos that seemed dead set against them. In the eerie calm that followed, Arya piped up once more, her cheer as relentless as ever. "Would you like to hear about the latest in digital gardening techniques?" Nevra closed her eyes, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Maybe after we save the world, Arya." "Very well," Arya chirped. "I'll just be here if you need me." "Comforting," Veyron said, shaking his head. "Let's hope we don't." And with that, the two unlikely heroes returned to their work, ready to face whatever strange new challenges the universe decided to throw their way. Because if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was making the best out of a bad situation, and laughing in the face of doom. Dr. Veyron glanced at the terminal, which hummed with the quiet satisfaction of a device that had just pulled off the impossible. Captain Nevra, leaning against a desk cluttered with old coffee cups and crumbs from lunches that had died of neglect, looked up from the stylus she was twirling. "So what's next on our magical mystery tour?" she asked, her voice as dry as the recycled air they both breathed. "Do we wait for the aliens to send us a fruit basket in apology?" Veyron snorted. "I wouldn't hold your breath. I doubt they even know what a fruit basket is. But hey, maybe we'll get lucky and they'll send us one of their tactical manuals by mistake." Always wanted to see how they plan to conquer the universe with complete ignorance. Nevra chuckled, the sound rough around the edges like her tolerance for intergalactic stupidity. "Yeah, that'd be a real page-turner." Chapter 1. How to Mistake Fiction for Fact. Chapter 2. Implementing Strategies from Children's Cartoons. Don't forget Chapter 3. How to Trip Over Your Own Tentacles, Veyron added, typing furiously on the terminal. Anyway, we need to press our advantage. Confusion is the game, and we're in the lead. Time to get creative, aren't we always? Nevra replied, watching the flickering screen with a mix of skepticism and amusement. So what's the plan, Professor Chaos? Varen tapped the side of his head. We give them more of what they can't seem to get enough of, our delicious fiction. Only this time, make it so convoluted even they can't untangle it. A sly grin spread across Nevra's face as she nodded. Ah, a web of misdirection. Like a digital spaghetti monster. Exactly. And then, while they're busy scratching their metaphorical heads, we take the opportunity to strengthen our defenses and see if we can get some kind of dialogue going. Dialogue? Nevra raised an eyebrow. With what? Interpretive dance? Something like that, Varen admitted. But hey, if we can get them talking, maybe they'll finally understand we're not the interstellar masterminds they think we are. Nevra rolled her eyes. Sure. Let's invite them over for tea and crumpets while we're at it. Excuse me, Mr. Alien, but you've just misread the entire plot of humanity's existence. Well, as long as they don't mistake tea for some kind of weapon, we should be fine, Varen quipped, his fingers still busy on the keyboard. Now, let's build them a lovely digital labyrinth to get lost in. Together, they worked at a pace that would put caffeinated squirrels to shame. Varen's fingers darted across the keys, constructing a tapestry of half-truths and whole lies, while Nevra offered a running commentary that was part critique, part stand-up routine. Throw in some zombies, Nevra suggested, eyes sparkling with mischief. Aliens love zombies. They're always good for a laugh. Done and done, Varen replied, adding a few lines of code. And how about some vampires? The sparkly kind. Oh god, not the sparkly kind, Nevra groaned. But fine, if it confuses them, why not? Add a unicorn for good measure. Make it a unicorn with a laser horn. Now you're just being ridiculous, Varen said, though he was already typing it in. But hey, when in doubt, double down on the absurd. As the digital counter-offensive took shape, the simulated skyline outside began to stabilize. The virtual buildings stood a little straighter, their erratic flickering reduced to a mere shimmer. Looks like Neo New York's sobering up, Nevra observed. Guess our little intervention is working. Yeah, but let's not get cocky. We've still got a long way to go, Varen reminded her. But if we can keep the aliens chasing their own tails, we might just have a shot. Chasing tails, huh? Remind me how that's different from our usual strategy, Nevra said, crossing her arms. Well, this time there's a method to our madness, Varen retorted, unable to keep the smile off his face. The terminal pinged again, a cheerful chime that belied the gravity of the situation. Varen glanced at the screen, eyebrows rising in surprise. What now? Nevra asked, a hint of impatience coloring her tone. Looks like they're trying to communicate, Varen said, his voice tinged with disbelief. Either that, or they're sending us more tactical fiction. Maybe they want to order a pizza, Nevra deadpanned, stepping over to peer at the screen. What does it say? The message was a jumble of alien script, interspersed with what looked like hastily inserted English phrases. After a few tense moments, the translation program kicked in, displaying something that almost made sense. Greetings, Earth strategists, Varen read aloud, struggling to keep a straight face. We recognize your superior battle tactics and wish to discuss terms. Nevra let out a low whistle. I'll be damned, they actually think we're some kind of tactical geniuses. Guess, game of lasers really did a number on them, Varen said, shaking his head. But hey, if they're willing to talk, maybe we can clear up this colossal misunderstanding. And if not, we just keep throwing nonsense at them until they give up, Nevra said with a shrug. Confusion as a strategy. Who knew it was this effective? Certainly not them, Varen agreed. But let's see if we can make contact without accidentally declaring war. Lead on, fearless leader, Nevra said, gesturing grandly. Let's go talk to our new alien pen pals. The two of them huddled over the terminal, Varen tapping out a careful response. Greetings, esteemed visitors, he began, carefully avoiding any terminology that might be misconstrued as aggressive or mocking. We are open to dialogue and hope for mutual understanding. Who knew diplomacy would be this easy? Nevra commented, watching Varen work. Just throw some fiction at the wall and see what sticks. Yeah, diplomacy by way of absurdity, Varen replied. Maybe we should put that on our resumes. Assuming we live long enough to need them, Nevra said, her expression somewhere between amused and resigned. The terminal chimed again, signaling another incoming message. This time, the tone was more formal, the aliens clearly attempting to match what they assumed was the humans' level of sophistication. We propose a neutral ground for discussion, Varen read, his eyes widening. Do they even understand what that means in a digital context? Probably not, Nevra said with a smirk. But hey, if they're willing to play ball, let's not burst their bubble. We accept your proposal, Varen typed back, his fingers steady despite the racing of his heart. We suggest a virtual meeting space. Neutral territory, free of tactical influence. Fancy way of saying, let's meet somewhere neither of us can blow each other up, Nevra quipped. Exactly. Simplicity is key, Varen said, hitting send. Now we wait and see if they're game. Minutes passed, each one dragging by like a tortuous eternity. Nevra resumed her pacing, while Varen kept one eye on the terminal, half expecting the aliens to change their minds and launch an attack instead. Finally, the terminal chimed again, and Varen leaned in to read the response. Agreed, he said, relief flooding his voice. They've accepted the meeting. Well, damn, Nevra breathed, her expression a complex mix of surprise and awe. Looks like we're about to have a sit-down with the universe's biggest idiots. Or geniuses, depending on your perspective, Varen pointed out. Yeah, let's stick with idiots for now, Nevra replied. It's more comforting. With the meeting set, Varen and Nevra set about preparing for the encounter. It was a delicate balance, crafting an environment that was both inviting and non-threatening, while also maintaining the illusion of Earth's strategic prowess. Think they'll buy it? Nevra asked, reviewing the digital meeting space they'd constructed, an unassuming virtual room with neutral colors and no discernible features. If they've bought everything else we've sold them, I don't see why not, Varen replied. But let's keep our fingers crossed. The appointed time arrived, and Varen and Nevra settled into their chairs, the virtual space around them humming with a subdued energy. A moment later, the aliens appeared, their digital avatars a bizarre mix of human assumptions and alien reality. They looked like a child's drawing brought to life, all limbs and angles that defied logical physics. Greetings, Earth strategists, the lead alien said, its voice a garbled mix of synthesized tones and awkward pauses. Varen smiled politely, struggling to keep his face neutral. Greetings, esteemed visitors. We're glad to finally speak with you directly. Your tactics are impressive, the alien continued, its digital eyes flicking around the room as if expecting a trap. Thank you, Varen replied smoothly. Though we must admit, your understanding of our culture has been creative. Nevra snorted, covering it with a cough. Yes, very creative. The alien hesitated, its form flickering slightly as it processed the comment. We wish to learn more about your strategic capabilities, it said finally. Of course, Varen said, nodding. We'd be happy to share our insights. But perhaps in exchange, you could share some of your own knowledge? The alien paused, its gaze sharpening as it considered the offer. Agreed, knowledge exchange is beneficial. Nevra leaned over, whispering to Varen. We're actually doing this. We're negotiating with aliens using nothing but smoke and mirrors. Yeah, Varen whispered back, struggling to contain his amazement. And somehow, it's working. With the stage set for a more peaceful dialogue, the two sides began to talk in earnest, trading stories and half-truths, each trying to outwit the other in a game of cosmic charades. And as the conversation wore on, a strange sense of camaraderie began to form. Perhaps it was the shared absurdity of the situation, or maybe it was the realization that neither side truly understood the other. Whatever it was, it marked the beginning of an unlikely alliance. As the virtual meeting drew to a close, the lead alien offered a tentative smile. We look forward to future negotiations. Likewise, Varen said, returning the smile with a sincerity that surprised even him. May our misunderstandings continue to be mutually beneficial. With that, the aliens departed, leaving the virtual room empty except for Varen and Nevra. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of what they'd just accomplished. You think they bought it? Nevra asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and triumph. Varen shrugged, a tired but satisfied grin on his face. For now, I think they did. But who knows how long it'll last? Nevra nodded, a gleam of determination in her eyes. Well, let's make the most of it. If they think we're geniuses, then let's keep giving them a show they won't forget. Agreed, Varen said, the thrill of victory still fresh in his veins. And who knows, maybe one day they'll figure out we're just making it up as we go along. Until then, Nivra said, her smile wide and unapologetic, let's keep them guessing. As they left the virtual space, Varen couldn't help but feel a strange sense of hope. They'd turned humanity's greatest weakness into its greatest strength, and for now, that seemed like enough. In a universe full of chaos and uncertainty, sometimes the best strategy was simply to embrace the madness and laugh in the face of the impossible. Because at the end of the day, survival was just another story to tell. And humans, as it turned out, were damn good storytellers. The digital sun was having one hell of a time staying in the sky, sputtering like a car with a terminal case of gas. It was the kind of backdrop that made you ponder the absurdity of existence, which, coincidentally, was exactly what Varen and Nivra were doing. So, we're heroes now? Nivra said, lounging back in a chair that looked like it might have been comfortable once, in a past life. Seems that way, Varen replied, half-heartedly picking at the keyboard of his terminal. You'd think saving humanity would come with less paperwork. Ah, the glamorous life of a savior, Nivra said, twirling a stylus between her fingers as if it owed her answers to the universe. What do you think they'll give us? Medals? A pizza party? I'd settle for a coffee that doesn't taste like industrial runoff, Varen mused, squinting at the terminal. The screen was still flickering like a strobe light on acid, but it was functional enough. Or maybe a vacation somewhere without digital sunsets. Don't get greedy, Nivra warned. We're lucky the digital infrastructure didn't collapse entirely. One good sneeze and we'd be up to our necks in nothingness. Their little digital war had ended, but the aftermath was proving just as chaotic. Earth's virtual existence was a house of cards, and the cards were all jokers. So what's next? Nivra asked, stretching. We gonna start playing nice with our new extraterrestrial friends? Varen chuckled dryly. I suppose so. They seem eager to learn about our strategic assets. Meaning our fiction. Exactly. Who knew Game of Lasers would be humanity's best ambassador? He shook his head in disbelief. Turns out, our nonsense is more persuasive than anything truthful. I always knew reality was overrated, Nivra said with a smirk. But I guess now we have to pretend we know what we're doing. Pretend? That's been our strategy all along. Arya, the governing AI, chose that moment to chime in with an announcement about the latest in digital flora arrangements. Great, see? Nivra said, rolling her eyes. It's reassuring to know our digital overlord has its priorities straight. At least it's not trying to kill us, Varen pointed out. Small mercies. They settled into a comfortable silence, the terminal's hum a constant companion. The digital landscape was in recovery mode, slowly knitting itself back together. Virtual buildings stood shakily, but at least they were standing. Do you think they'll keep buying it? Nivra asked, breaking the silence. The fiction, I mean. As long as it's entertaining, Varen said, and as long as we keep it coming. They seem to have a taste for Earth's stories. He glanced at the terminal, where an alien message blinked patiently, waiting to be opened. The aliens were sending over their own cultural assets now, though what constituted culture in their corner of the universe was still up for debate. Think we should check that? Nivra asked, nodding at the message. Only if you're ready to sift through whatever passes for alien literature. Last one was like reading a legal contract written by a hyperactive child. Sounds delightful. Let's dive in, Nivra said, leaning over Varen's shoulder as he opened the message. The text was a mix of symbols and awkward English phrases, but the translation program had gotten better at sorting through the mess. Greetings. It began, cheerfully oblivious to the chaos its senders had inadvertently caused. We have enjoyed your tales of Laser Showdown. Eager to see next installment. Wonderful, Nivra drawled. We've gone from strategists to screenwriters. They're just following the rule of any good series, Varen said, typing out a response. Always leave them wanting more. He sent the message with a click, watching as the terminal processed the data. The aliens were proving to be surprisingly good conversationalists, despite the language barrier. Their curiosity was insatiable, a bottomless pit that could only be filled with the bizarre and fantastical. So what's our next move? Nivra asked, watching the digital skyline flicker uncertainly. We keep feeding them stories, Varen said, leaning back in his chair. And in the meantime, we patch up our defenses. Make sure our house of cards doesn't blow over in the next breeze. Sounds like a plan, Nevra said, her tone a mix of sarcasm and genuine determination. And if they ever catch on? Then we improvise, Varen replied with a shrug. It's what we do best. As they contemplated the digital future, the terminal chimed again. This time, it was a message from Earth's Digital Council, congratulating them on their successful negotiation and extending an invitation to a formal ceremony. They really want to throw us a party, Nevra said, amazed. Guess they're not used to winning. Neither are we, to be fair. Nevra laughed, a sound that echoed in the small, cluttered space. I suppose there's a first time for everything. The ceremony was as grand as one could expect in a virtual setting. A gathering of avatars, all polished and pristine, filled the digital hall. Varen and Nevra stood awkwardly at the center, the focus of attention they never really wanted. Smile and wave, Nevra whispered, keeping her expression neutral. That's what they do, right? What do we have to smile about? Varen muttered, but he complied, offering a half-hearted wave to the crowd. The applause was a gentle roar, the sound of ones and zeros clapping in unison. The council members took turns heaping praise on them, each speech a little more florid than the last. They spoke of bravery, of cunning, of humanity's indomitable spirit, all the usual platitudes reserved for moments like this. Think we should tell them the truth? Nevra whispered, eyes scanning the room. That we were flying by the seat of our pants the whole time? Nah, Varen replied, watching the digital sun set on the simulated skyline outside. Let them have their narrative. It's a good one. The speeches ended, and the room transitioned to mingling and networking, avatars shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries. Varen and Nevra found themselves surrounded by eager faces, all wanting a piece of their newfound fame. So, what's it like? Someone asked, a young-looking avatar with an expression of awe. Negotiating with aliens? It's like trying to explain the internet to your grandparents, Nevra said dryly. Only with more lasers. And less comprehension, Varen added, smiling politely at the appreciative chuckles. The conversation shifted, focusing on the future of Earth's digital defenses. The council was keen to capitalize on their victory, to ensure they wouldn't be caught off guard again. Plans were discussed, strategies outlined, all very official and serious. So, they're actually going to listen to us now? Nevra asked, a note of disbelief in her voice. Apparently, Varen said, nodding sagely. Heroes get a say in things, it seems. About damn time. The evening wore on, the festivities a curious blend of celebration and cautious optimism. Earth's digital infrastructure was still a patchwork, but it was their patchwork, and that was enough for now. As the digital sun dipped below the horizon, Varen and Nevra found themselves on a balcony overlooking the simulated city. The skyline was a mess, but it was their mess, a testament to humanity's resilience, or perhaps just its stubborn refusal to lie down and die. Think we'll ever get used to this? Nevra asked, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Doubt it, Varen said, leaning on the railing. But maybe that's a good thing. Keeps us on our toes. True, Nevra agreed, a small smile playing on her lips. And who knows, maybe one day we'll actually know what we're doing. Stranger things have happened. They stood in companionable silence, watching as the digital sky shifted through its programmed phases. The world they'd fought to protect was still here, still standing, an imperfect, glitchy marvel of human ingenuity. So, what now? Nevra asked, turning to face him. Now? Varen echoed, a thoughtful look on his face. Now we keep telling stories. Keep them entertained. Think we can manage that? Considering what we've pulled off so far. Varen grinned, a spark of mischievous confidence in his eyes. I think we've got this. And so they watched the virtual stars come out, each one a reminder of the vast, chaotic universe they inhabited. It was a strange, unpredictable world, full of uncertainty and danger. But it was their world, their story, and for the first time in a long time, they were the ones writing it. Here's to the next chapter, Nevra said, raising an imaginary glass. To the next chapter, Varen echoed, clinking his own invisible glass against hers. And as they stood there, gazing out at the digital horizon, they couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Because in the end, it wasn't the technology or the tactics that had won the day. It was the stories, the tall tales and wild fictions that had sparked an impossible alliance. Perhaps, Varen thought, humanity's greatest strength was its ability to laugh in the face of chaos, to find meaning in madness. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. As the night deepened around them, full of whispered promises and endless possibilities, they turned back to the party, ready to face whatever came next. With a story to tell and a world to rebuild, the future was wide open. And, as Varen and Nivra knew all too well, the best stories were always the ones you wrote yourself.